Those are very kind introductions. Thank you very much. And before I read, I would like to thank Chairman Chaffetz and Ranking Member Lynch, not only for the opportunity to appear here, but also I listened to your remarks about two things, whistleblowing and oversight, and they're kind of connected. And I want Mr. Lynch to know that I still stand by my 2009 letter. And I'm glad that everybody else so far that has spoken on this committee realizes that sometimes you're in the majority and sometimes you're in the minority. There's a process that has to be available. So I'm going to be responding in a letter to the White House in a day or two to those recommendations they put out that I disagree with them and why I disagree with them. And I think a new phrase in this town is very appropriate for what this issue is all about, because the word drain the swamp doesn't necessarily mean fire people or get rid of organizations. It means change the culture in this town. And one of the cultures is, whether you have Republican or Democrat presidents, the bureaucracy is sometimes embarrassed by what they do, and we want to expose it. And we want to expose it because transparency brings accountability. And accountability is very important if you work for the American taxpayers. The second thing I would say deals with the word whistleblower. Mr. Dotson is one example of how whistleblowers are treated both in Republican and Democrat administrations. And I suggest to this president, as I've suggested to other presidents, that what we need is once a year a Rose Garden ceremony honoring some whistleblowers, so that the bureaucracy, which is permanent, and presidents and members of Congress are not permanent, that from the top of the bureaucracy, in other words, the chief executive, all the way down to whatever you want to consider the job in the lower end of the bureaucracy, that whistleblowing is a political, a patriotic thing and the right thing to do, and that they ought to be honored. Normally, how are they treated by a bureaucracy, not just in ATF, not just in the Justice Department, but almost throughout the bureaucracy? They're treated like a skunk at a picnic, and that's wrong. And government's less off for it when we have that attitude. I would like to proceed, so I hope you haven't started the clock yet.
The way of the Senate, absolutely.
Thank you for inviting me to testify about an important congressional investigation that the Justice Department has stonewalled for far too long, Operation Fast and Furious. This investigation began 6 years ago. The fact that it is still tied up in the courts is proof positive that our system of checks and balances is broken. Congress needs to reform its process for enforcing compliance with subpoenas. It all started when courageous agents blew the whistle on gun walking to the Senate Judiciary Committee. We learned that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives sanctioned the illegal sale of hundreds of assault weapons to straw purchasers, who then trafficked the guns to Mexican cartels. These weapons have since been discovered in the hands of criminals, both within the United States and Mexico. 2 of these weapons were used in the firefight that led to the tragic death of Border Patrol Agent Brian Terry in December 2010. After it became clear that the government planned to cover it up, agents, patriotic agents, blew the whistle. On January 27, 2011, I wrote to ATF for answers, but the Department of Justice and ATF had no intention looking for honest answers and being transparent. In fact, from the very onset, bureaucrats employed shameless delay tactics to obstruct the investigation. In a letter to me, February 4th, 2011, department officials denied that ATF had ever walked guns, but the evidence kept mounting that the official denial was just plain false. Through documents obtained during this long litigation, we have learned how the bureaucrats and even political appointees reacted when they learned the truth. As the department became aware that the information it provided to Congress was wrong, it kept the truth hidden. DOJ refused to come clean, refused to notify Congress, and refused to correct the record. As soon as March 11th, officials at ATF and within the department raised concerns about the inaccuracy of the information provided to me in that February 4th letter. But the department still failed to withdraw the letter until 9 months later in December, thus admitting they lied to a U.S. senator or to the United States Senate. Why did it take so long then to admit the truth to Congress? Our two committees requested documents from the department that would shed light on the delay. October 2011, this House committee issued a subpoena for documents from the Department of Justice, including documents related to the department's response to Congress. The department initially refused to produce any documents responses to the subpoena. It refused to assert any privilege at that time or provide a log of withheld documents so that this committee could consider whether there were any legitimate reasons for not providing those documents. Instead, the department merely made vague, feeble claims that the documents implicated words we're acquainted with, confidentiality interests, or another words were separate that they used as an excuse, separation of power concerns. Then the ridiculous happened. In June 2012, the Justice Department had to ask President Obama to give it some cover by formally asserting executive privilege. The request came on the eve of a vote in this committee to hold the Attorney General in contempt. And the President's assertion was communicated to this committee only minutes before the scheduled vote. The committee rejected the President's claim on the merits, and so did the full House in a historic bipartisan vote, because it was the first time an Attorney General was held in contempt of Congress. But to add to the obstruction, the Obama administration refused to present the contempt citation to a grand jury as required by statute. Then in August 2012, this committee filed a civil lawsuit to try and enforce its subpoena that way. Once in the courts, even more lengthy delays then began. 2 years later, August 2014, the court finally ordered the department to review all the documents, provide a log explaining why it wanted to withhold specific items, and to produce everything that the department itself admitted was not covered by any privilege. The department then produced more than 10,000 of the original withheld documents. These documents totaled about 64,000 pages. To be clear, and this is very important, the department tried to hide these documents from Congress by getting President Obama to assert executive privilege. But once the case was before a judge, the president then totally abandoned that claim. In effect, the government admitted that this privilege did not apply to those documents. Why did it take a contempt citation from Congress to force the executive branch to finally admit that it hid documents from people's representatives for completely bogus reasons? Attorney General Holder preferred to be held in contempt rather than admit the authority of this committee to compel production of the documents through a subpoena, even documents that the Justice Department and the President did not believe were privileged. If that doesn't illustrate how broken our system of congressional subpoena enforcement is, then I don't know what does. The capitulation of the department, once a judge finally forced its hand, proves that the initial claim of privilege that those claims were deceptive and unfounded. It was nothing more than an attempt to obstruct Congress's constitutional responsibility of oversight and this investigation. The department's belated admission that those 64,000 pages were not privileged puts the gold seal of authenticity on the House's bipartisan vote to hold the Attorney General in contempt. The documents expose the Justice Department's intent to hide information from Congress and upsets the balance of powers. Obstructing a valid inquiry by a separate co-equal branch of government undermines our constitutional system of checks and balances. The documents show a highly politicized climate at the Obama administration's main justice, focused more on spin and cover-up than on transparency and fact-finding. Now, despite the court's orders to the department to produce documents that were admittedly not privileged, the judge's opinion as a whole is problematic, and we have to take a good look at that. Although the judge also later ordered the production of more material, the judge's reasoning is fatally flawed. The judge erroneously concluded that certain of the department's underlying privilege claims, although waived, were valid. The judge gave the House a victory in practice, but gave the department a victory on principle. By splitting the baby in this way, the opinion seeks for the first time to push the scope of executive privilege outside the White House to cloak low-level government bureaucrats in secrecy. This is new and unprecedented territory. It is a major threat to the oversight powers of the legislative branch. The president should not be able to shield information in all the vast agencies and departments of government from congressional scrutiny. If it has nothing to do with the advice to the president by his advisors, then why should it be privileged? That is why the House must push forward with its appeal to get the district court's opinion overturned. The so-called deliberative process privilege is no constitutional privilege at all. It is common law doctrine and a statutory exception under the Freedom of Information Act only. It only applies to discussions about the formulation of policy and only before a final policy decision has been made. The privilege should not extend to allow the department to hide its internal communications about responding to Congress. These communications were not to or from the president, and now we know that they largely focused on obstructing Congress and strategizing to avoid negative press coverage. These communications can hardly be characterized as forming Department of Justice policy, as the judge wants us to think, and should not even be protected by the deliberative process statutory exemption, let alone some new form of executive privilege. Now, this litigation has been ongoing for a long time. The American people, including this Terry family, the Terry family, they're right here. They're right here to remind us of what government can do that's illegal and get away with it. They remind us of what can be done when whistleblowers that are politically conscious or patriotically conscious come forward. So let me start again. The American people, including the Terry family here with us today, deserve a complete accounting for questions posed in this investigation that began with people coming to me in 2011. It has been, as we've repeated so many times, 6 long years. We are still waiting. But this is not just about documents in Fast and Furious. This case also must be considered from the perspective of the institutional role of Congress of oversight. So I urge you all to take off your partisan hats for a moment. Imagine if the shoe were on the other foot. This case has broad implications for the ability of elected representatives of the American people to do our constitutional duty to act as a check on the executive branch of government. Clearly, Congress needs to do something. It cannot take years for this body to get answers from a co-equal branch of government about information that has no legal basis to stay hidden from the representatives of the American people, and a proper check to make sure that the executive branch does its job of duly enforcing the law. That is why I am working with my colleagues on proposals to modernize the rules of engagement in congressional oversight. We need a package of rules and legislative changes so that responders to congressional inquiries cannot rely on phony, privileged claims and delay tactics. These changes will make it easier for members of Congress to get the information they need to do their job for the American people that pay them and who they represent. So I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues in both the Senate and the House on these proposals, and hope you will all join me. I thank you for allowing me to appear, but more importantly, we would not be where we are today because in 2011, I was not a chairman of a committee, and those excuses were used against me as this administration is using those excuses once again. So this committee was in the majority, and we had a chairman and a committee members that were willing to pursue this, and thank God you were in the majority at that time, or we still may not have any information. Thank you very much.
Chairman Grassley.